Welcome back to An Amber a Day. I'm your host, Amber Fisher, and today we're starting a new series for the podcast, and this is a series where I'm going to be answering your questions. These are all questions that have come in either through Instagram DMs or the official form for questions for the podcast, and what I'm going to do is just each one of these episodes, I'm just going to go through several of them, answer them as best as I can, just to give you a little bit of feedback, and then we'll save the rest for the next time. So before we get going, if you have a question for me, or this episode or any of my other episodes sparks a question for you about your particular story, feel free to click on the link in the description box below this episode and go and fill out. It's just a Google form. You can fill out, tell me a little bit about your story, and then the question that you have, and I will hopefully be able to answer it on the air. All right, so the first question we have comes from Victoria, and this question is, can you explain how to lose weight with insulin resistance and high DHEA? So this is a great question. Insulin resistance and high DHEA both are kind of come from two of the main sort of root cause issues of PCOS, which would be insulin resistance and adrenal dysfunction. DHEA is an androgen. So androgens are quote unquote male hormones, right? DHEA is an androgen produced by our adrenal glands, which are our fight or flight stress hormone glands. And insulin is the transport for sugars from the foods that we eat to get into our cells so our cells can use them for energy. And in PCOS, we often have issues with insulin resistance. That's pretty common across the board, but the DHEA is not everybody is dealing with high DHEA. Typically, we know that high DHEA can be associated with insulin resistance. And so there is a selection of people who, if their insulin resistance is, affecting their body enough, it can create high DHEA, or DHEAS is usually the one we're looking at here. And in that case, the best advice I could give you is to really focus your efforts on your insulin resistance. But often when DHEA is high, as well as insulin being out of whack, we've got a stress hormone problem going on. So either the person is, dealing with the effects of childhood trauma, high ACE score that's affecting their fight or flight mechanisms. And so they are activated or overactivated more often than they should be. And then that is affecting their insulin, or their insulin resistance is putting undue stress on their adrenal glands, or in some cases, inflammation from their diet or gut health issues is kind of contributing to their adrenals becoming like out of balance, which is then making their insulin resistance worse. So there are a lot of different ways that this can look in a different person. And the hard part is figuring out which type of person you are. But the first thing I would do is look at your lifestyle right now. Do you get at least 8 hours of sleep every night? And is it quality sleep? Do you have a particularly stressful job, even if you don't perceive it as stressful? Like, are you a nurse or a teacher? A lot of times folks in those professions don't perceive themselves to be stressed, but their bodies actually are stressed because of the amount of pressure on them. Speaking of pressure, do you have a lot of pressures in your life? Are you the oldest daughter? Are you, taking care of elderly relatives? Are you a mom of young children? There are a lot of different places where stress and overwhelm can show up, and some of us handle it energetically or physically better than others. But look at your life. Do you have areas where you could work on giving yourself more space? Or are there places where you are taking on too much, whether by choice or not? That may be a big driver for high DHEA. If that's not the case, then consider the idea of, if you did experience traumatic things, either in your younger years or maybe even in your early 20s, something like that, like medical trauma or, sexual abuse, things like that. Higher ACE scores or adverse childhood events are associated in PCOS with PCOS. And so what those do is they make us less resilient to stress. So whereas from the outside world, our life may not look very stressful, our experience of it is more stressful because we don't have a great gauge on when to produce stress hormones and when not to. So if that's the case for you, I would consider, going to therapy, a trauma-informed therapist, and kind of working on things from that perspective. It may seem very roundabout, but it can actually help a lot with your PCOS and your insulin. One thing that's often going on when people have overactivated fight or flight hormones is that their blood sugar gets spiked at random times, because when we get anxious, our body actually releases sugars from our muscles and our liver that we're storing. The storage form of the sugar is called glycogen. It'll release it into our bloodstream to use for energy, because the concept is like, oh my gosh, we're under attack. We need energy to run. Unfortunately, in our modern lives, like, we don't really need that energy to run. We're just, somebody just yelled at us, or we saw an email that we didn't want to see, or what have you. And so your blood sugar may be, getting spiked too often from stress hormone spikes. And so working on your stress and your management of stress can actually play a big role in your insulin management. And for people who have a lot of issues there, that's actually the place where they need to do more work. We know, like, we have research that says that meditation and yoga and, vagus nerve stimulation, all those kinds of things are helpful for this issue in PCOS. But other things that I always suggest when we do have insulin resistance at the same time is to avoid anything super drastic. So with insulin resistance, we're often told go keto or start doing intermittent fasting, those types of things, running, anything like that is going to be more stressful on the body. And so that can lead to increased spikes of that blood sugar from the stress hormone. So I recommend, working on structure and balance, eating at the same time every day if you can, eating more protein, more fiber, because those are kind of relaxing nutrients for a lot of people. And if you do all that, your body should even out with time, and you should see some weight reduction. Now, if that's not the case after really truly addressing those things, then the question becomes a question of macronutrients, calories, all that kind of stuff. There is still an element when we want to lose weight where we do have to pay attention to those things. And sometimes we avoid, difficult sensations like hunger when we're trying to lose weight. And that can hold us back if we need some calorie restriction. So there's a lot that's happening here, but first and foremost, work on your stress, because, that should play into some natural weight reduction. Things like gentle movement, walking can be really helpful here. And just generally treat your body with more gentleness and kindness. Oftentimes when we have the combination of insulin resistance and high DHEA, we are kind of hyper-focused on the weight loss piece. And, I've been there. It's hard to not hyper-focus on it because it's the most frustrating part, but that hyper-focus is part of where the issue is coming from. And if we can reframe our thoughts about it and just start reframing our PCOS body as, loving and kind, and it's taking care of us the best way it can, and we kind of release some of that pressure to lose weight, then it becomes easier to really make changes to our health that may actually result in real weight loss in the future, instead of kind of forcing it, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Hopefully that makes sense, but those are some tips on that issue. So let's move on to the next question. Thank you, Victoria, for that one. All right. So this is from Steffi. Can you please share more information on insulin resistance and PCOS and how to manage it if a person is in a 9-to-5 job and has PCOS? This can feel very overwhelming and difficult at the beginning, for sure. The basic concepts here are the same, though. So the first concept is understanding that your health is your priority, and it needs to come before other things that you're putting in a higher priority spot. There's a really good episode that I'm going to be releasing soon with Renee Claire, who is a like time blocking, she's like a business coach, but she's going to talk to us about time blocking and making our self-care a priority, because your health and your time for yourself, your energy that you have, is what's going to give you the energy to be successful at all of the different things. A 9-to-5 job is not impossible to work around with insulin resistance, but it does take some planning, right? So I would highly recommend, waking up maybe a little bit early, not so much that it impacts how much sleep you're getting, because we should be going to sleep a little earlier in the evening than usually we are. But having a morning routine that's structured more for self-care. So whether that means eating a good solid breakfast that has enough protein in it, doing some meditation, like whatever you need to sort of like get yourself going in the morning without scrolling your phone, that helps a lot with insulin resistance, believe it or not. And I think the biggest thing that trips people up is, well, there's two things. Number one is lunch, and number two is dinner. So the reasons for this are different though, because typically with lunch, it's like we haven't planned ahead. And so we didn't bring anything, so we got to go eat out, or our coworkers want to go eat out, and so we need to make choices on the fly. And then with dinner, a lot of times the issue is that the prep takes so long that by the time we eat, it's like 9 o'clock at night, and so it's just like it feels overwhelming. So the biggest advice I can give you is to carve out some time on your weekend or your days off, one of your days off, to pre-prep some of the things you're going to be eating for the week. It doesn't have to be this whole intense prepping thing where you're cooking like multiple meals and you're cooking all the veggies and all the different things. But even something as simple as like cutting up the carrots and onions that you're going to need to cook, a soup 3 days from now, and having those, like the ingredients themselves prepped and ready for you to cook when you get home, can make a big difference in the amount of time you're spending. In my PCOS Foundations course, which you can find the link to in the description box, I have a bonus video where I talk specifically about, I show you how I do my meal prepping for my PCOS. And I usually take a few hours on Sunday. I actually wake up Sunday morning. I think about like what kinds of things do I want to eat for the week? And usually I'm planning around my meat choices for the week. Like I like to kind of just like eat the same meat for the whole week. So if it's going to be ground beef, then I'm going to have a lot of different ground beef dishes. If it's going to be chicken, I'm going to have a lot of chicken that week, what have you. You can do, I've done it before where I've done like 2 different meats, but you typically want to think of recipes that require a lot of the same ingredients. That way you're getting different textures, different flavors, but you're like also not like breaking the bank trying to buy all kinds of different stuff and then you end up not eating it, right? So I always plan to cook about 2 or 3 times during the upcoming week, and I'm making enough that I have leftovers so that I can take them for lunches, so that I can have them for the next evening when I don't feel like cooking. I do not recommend trying to cook every single night. So I wake up Sunday morning, I think about what I'm going to make. I peruse recipes on Pinterest or on the internet. I kind of like, or if it's going to be a simple meal, I just sort of figure out what I'm going to need for it, make my grocery list, go to the store, or I order it for pickup. And then I come home and I make the big stuff, the stuff that takes the longest. So usually that means I'm cooking something in the oven, something in the crock pot, something on the stovetop. I'm making, the different meats that I'm going to need. And oftentimes with the veggies, I just sort of pre-prep them a bit and I wait to cook them until the day of that I'm going to eat them. If the meal's going to be later in the week, because that ends up helping me with the texture of them, because veggies can get mushy after a while. So what I'm trying to say here is you can adjust your meal planning needs for what you need. I also often do this where instead of just prepping for the whole week, I will prep for 4 days. And then I'll plan that like on Thursday or Friday, I'm going to, cook a fresh meal then. so that I can have something new to eat or what have you. So there are a lot of different ways to do it. It doesn't have to be this thing where like you're making your individual little containers of food for every day of the week, although that can be really helpful. The real key is just being prepared, knowing what you're going to eat that week, knowing that you have the ingredients, knowing when you're going to cook them. Like you have to plan in advance because your future self will thank you for that. If you're not prepared, then you end up running into issues where you have to think on the fly, and that's more difficult. Now, when you do have to think on the fly, let's say you are going to go to a restaurant or you're going to go out with your coworkers, my tip is always to just try to be healthy-ish at restaurants. So I don't need you to be 100%, oh, I'm only having the salad to be insulin resistance friendly. If you feel like a salad, great. But what I usually do is I think about what is the one thing that I really am craving right now. Maybe it's based on the restaurant. Maybe it's just based on the day, do I really want the burger with the bun? Do I really want the fries? Like, what is the thing that I'm like most wanting? And I remind myself that the food's always there. Like the restaurant's always going to be there. I can get the thing that I want next time if I can't get both things at the same time. And then I'll order one of the things, the thing that I really want. So let's say I'm going to get burger and fries. So I will order the burger with the bun and I'll have a side salad instead of the fries. Or if I really want the fries, I'll get the burger, but I'll have it open faced, or I'll have it without a bun. And I will, eat the fries with that. And maybe I'll still order the side salad just to get some extra fiber and veggies if I'm really craving it or needing it in my day or something like that. So every time you go out and it's not a pre-planned, like, okay, this is, I'm going on, it's a special occasion, or it's like my day off from, thinking about my insulin resistance or what have you, because those kinds of days are important too. But if it's not one of those days, it's just a weekday lunch, we want to focus on making a choice that's going to be satisfying. It's going to satisfy a craving, but that's also going to help with our insulin resistance. So the things we're thinking about are, how can I cut back on carbs a little bit in this meal? How can I add more nutrition to this meal, or more fiber? So those two things are like, it's an addition and a little bit of a subtraction too. And if you start to make a note each time you go to a different restaurant, I'm assuming that you frequent the same kinds of places. If you're going out with coworkers, then you'll know what things are safe on the menu or what things aren't safe on the menu. Even if it's like, okay, we're going to get wings. Well, I'm getting naked wings. I'm dipping them in, barbecue sauce or something like that, but they're not breaded. And then I'm getting like the little veggie sticks on the side instead of having fries with it or something like that. So there are ways to kind of work around this. But the biggest thing is to plan in advance for your meals. And, the getting there to the point where that's a habit and it's not overwhelmingly hard does take time. You're reformulating, you're like retraining your brain. So it's okay for it to take time. It's okay for you to like not do it perfectly. It doesn't mean that you've failed. You're learning. You're learning as you go, you're building knowledge, you're building habits, like just keep working on it. I think people altogether put way too much pressure on themselves to be like 0 to 100 healthy. Like everything I do is super healthy and perfect for my insulin resistance and blah, blah, blah. It's really not like that. It's like, it's more just your response to blood sugar and insulin and all that stuff is a series of choices that you make every day at every meal. And so look at where you're coming from and where you want to be, and let yourself evolve in that direction organically. It will happen if it's on your mind and you're making hard choices sometimes. Like, it will happen. Okay, this is a question from Caitlin, Cataline. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. So she says, where should I look to now? I went to an endometriosis specialist who said PCOS does not cause pain and should not cause pain. He's very dismissive with questions and dismisses the thought of endometriosis. He says it's very rare to see PCOS and endometriosis. You have pain because you haven't had a baby yet. She says, is this gaslighting? Yes. He mentioned my labs are quote unquote fine. And he only commented on my thyroid he first said it was low and would need work if I was trying to conceive a baby. I asked him if this is something that would affect me, and with a laugh, he said that my thyroid is lazy. I had a SHG done, and I have a small polyp along with a small fibroid. I'm completely frustrated looking for answers to where my pain is coming from instead of putting a bandage on it. He prescribed me pain medication and birth control. After telling him I was not interested in those two things, he pointed a finger towards GI. And what are your thoughts? Thank you for your knowledge you've been putting on YouTube. I was really prepared for this conversation with him because of you. I was able to advocate for myself for the first time. Thank you. That's the end of my TED Talk. Well, thank you, Catalin. That's very sweet. I really appreciate that. And I'm glad that my work has helped. So there's a lot of stuff to tackle in this one. The first thing, those with PCOS actually do have endometriosis more commonly than the population at large. It's not like a thing where everyone with PCOS has endometriosis, but they can coexist. And so the main kind of connection between these two things is the fact that in PCOS, we tend to have more issues with estrogen dominance. And it definitely sounds to me, based on your what you've said here, that that is something that's going on with you. Excuse me. So your thyroid is definitely like important here. And so if your thyroid is sluggish, like, yes, that can affect fertility, that can affect conceiving for a baby. But what I'm more concerned with is some of these deeper issues going on, that you've got like a polyp and a fibroid. Those are both signs of estrogen dominance. Wow, I'm getting really tripped up on my words. Those are both signs of estrogen dominance. And this is something that's more common in PCOS. And the reason for that is there are numerous reasons why it could be going on, contributions to it. The biggest one is unopposed estrogen due to lack of ovulation. So if you are having really irregular periods where, they're coming like every 4 months, every 6 months, like you're not sure when it's coming, oftentimes those bleeds are not due to the fact that you ovulated. They're called withdrawal bleeds, or they're anovulatory bleeds, meaning you did not ovulate. When we ovulate, we produce the hormone progesterone, and progesterone is the natural balancer to estrogen. So we need both. And in PCOS, we often don't get enough progesterone simply because we are not ovulating every month like the average person would. And so we're not getting progesterone. We're getting a lot of estrogen. All of the little follicles and cysts in the ovaries create their own estrogen. If you've got endometriosis as well, which if you've got a lot of pain, you may very well have, then that produces its own estrogen. So it sounds like there's a lot of estrogen circulating in your system. Those with PCOS also often have issues with their liver and hormone metabolism. And another place where estrogen dominance issues sort of come from is we tend to have more of what are called beta glucuronidase enzymes. These are enzymes in the gut that actually take estrogens that we're ready to get rid of through the stool, and they help us reabsorb them so that our body has to deal with them all over again. So we often think in PCOS about testosterone and having too much testosterone, but what a lot of people don't understand is that hormones are a conversion process. So they actually morph into each other down a certain pathway. So like testosterones or androgens, for example, can convert into estrogens. So if we've got a lot of estrogens in the system, a lot of androgens in the system, then we could also have a lot of estrogens in the system purely because of that conversion. And we know that there is a lot of that conversion going on in PCOS because we tend to have more aromatase activity, which is an enzyme that converts testosterone to estrogens. That's based often on diet choices, excess sugar consumption, and things like that. But there's just a lot of different things in PCOS that contribute to that over estrogenized environment. And then we're not getting that progesterone back. Unfortunately, birth control, it does put a Band-Aid on it. It does help in the moment. And if you are having polyps and fibroids, like, of course, you need to talk with your medical team. And this is not medical advice, but if you're having polyps and fibroids, like you may be at more risk of having issues with like endometrial cancers or things like that, just based on, having more of an estrogenized environment. And so birth control can be a helpful tool to prevent those things from happening. But when all said and done, birth control also does sort of, it can make that problem like worse when we come off of it. So it's a catch-22. I will say I had endometrial cancer when I was about 25, and I definitely had to be on birth control as a preventative. And, I'm glad that I did. It did help with preventing recurrence, but it also caused a range of other issues that, I didn't love. Here's the thing about all of this. When there are estrogen dominance issues in PCOS, there are almost always gut health issues as well. And so him sort of pointing you towards GI is actually not it's not the worst thing in the world. I mean, usually I'm guessing from the way that this is written that you are either not in the United States or English is not your first language. So I'm guessing you don't live in the United States, but in the US, we typically keep those things very separate, right? We talk about estrogenic issues or whatever, and we're like, oh, it's just happening, or it's happening because of unopposed progesterone, but we don't think about the ways that the gut might play a role in that. There actually are a ton of ways where the gut plays a role in that. So much so that actually last week, I did the talk for my group program, the functional PCOS group program that I run a couple times a year with Hannah Mule, the conscious nutritionist. And it was my week to talk about gut health and estrogen dominance. And we combine those two topics because they're so interconnected. So I would suggest a focus on your gut health and for working on your digestion and increasing your fiber amounts, because that will help with clearance of hormones, increasing your B vitamin amounts, because that will help with hormone metabolism. If possible, I think that it would be wise for you to work one-on-one with somebody who is informed about this stuff. The other thing I want to say is that with labs, particularly when it comes to estrogen on labs, typically they're only running a couple of different markers. So they're running like estradiol, which is historically considered like the good form of estrogen. And so if we're making a lot of estrogen metabolites that are going through a more negative or inflammatory pathway, it may not show up on blood work unless they're doing like really, really extensive blood work, which is almost never done. So just because your estradiol levels look normal doesn't mean that you're not estrogen dominant. Just because your testosterone levels look normal doesn't mean that you don't have too many androgens circulating around. There are other types of androgens. There are other types of estrogens. So I wouldn't be convinced that just because your labs looked quote unquote fine that you don't have an issue here. I mean, you have the physical manifestations of it, polyps, fibroids, like these are all signs of estrogen issues. You've got a lot of pain, like, so anyway, one thing like supplementally that can help with this is there are kind of two supplements that I rely on a lot in my practice, which is DIM, which it helps your liver sort of metabolize estrogens and androgens, and then calcium D-glucarate, which helps prevent some with that reuptake issue in the gut. And the thing that's beneficial about working one-on-one with somebody here is that you don't want to just take DIM, because DIM will dump a lot of stuff into your gut. And if your gut's not healthy, then, you'll just reabsorb it. So it's kind of like, it's not helping, but, somebody who understands the detoxification pathways would probably be helpful for understanding this a little bit better. But yeah, DIM, calcium D-glucarate, those are things that I rely on a lot. NAC is a great one. The antioxidant support can be helpful here. And there's a product called DIM Detox by Pure Encapsulations that I use a ton in my practice with stuff like this, but definitely consult with a doctor to make sure that that's right for you. And I wouldn't take that if you're like pregnant, breastfeeding, all that kind of stuff. And the other thing, and I think the biggest thing that I would really work on, is working on your gut health. So Probiotics may be important here, but definitely more prebiotic foods, more anti-inflammatory foods, those kinds of things. I've done several podcasts on like the gut and PCOS and eating for the gut. A more Mediterranean style diet is usually helpful here. So I would highly, highly suggest looking into that kind of a thing, as it can really be really helpful. And then another thing to think about is that excess body fat does create its own estrogens. And so if there's an excessive amount of excess body fat, especially in the abdomen or the hips and thighs, it might be worth working on, reducing that somewhat. That can be difficult when you've got a highly estrogenic environment, for sure, but it is something that's has to be part of the conversation. So, but that is a really great question, and I hope you get some help, and I hope you get some answers. And thank you for submitting that. Okay, this is a question from Mia, and I think this is the last one we're going to do for today, because I'm going to try to not have these podcasts be super, super long. Can you talk about the correlation between PCOS and hidradenitis suppurativa, or HS? I always just say HS because I really hate trying to pronounce that. I actually work a lot with HS in my practice, and so HS is it's an autoimmune issue. And we know that those with PCOS tend to have more issues with autoimmunity than the population at large. So the biggest connection here is, again, with the gut. There may be some connections between HS and fungal overgrowths or yeast overgrowths. And so sometimes reducing yeasts in the diet, so reducing mushroom consumption, grapes, fermented products, especially wine, cheese, tomato products that are prepackaged can be helpful in situations like this. But fundamentally, the biggest thing to work on with HS is the gut connection. So there may be some food sensitivities that are here now. There may be some work that needs to be done on leaky gut and intestinal permeability. And I would refer you to any of my podcasts on autoimmunity and any of my podcasts on gut health and inflammation, because I think that those would probably be helpful for you. And HS, I think, is just one of those things where, since it does get kind of complicated, it can be more helpful to work one-on-one with somebody if possible. But from the PCOS perspective, the only real connection there is just the fact that we tend to have more immune issues, and those usually sort of stem from the gut. So I would work a lot on, the PCOS inflammation stuff, because that's always almost always gut connected. So yeah, that's where I would kind of start, is looking at some of my resources on inflammation and gut health. Anyone who's watching this and has issues with those things would probably benefit more from my functional PCOS course, which is the self-paced version of my group program, just because it goes into more depth on the gut specifically, and it walks you through doing an elimination diet during the middle part, so that you can figure out if there's potentially food allergies or food sensitivities that are sort of hiding, which often is the case in anything that's remotely autoimmune. So that would be my suggestion there. Next time, we will talk about some of these other questions that I'm getting, and I hope you guys will submit some more for me. I have 4 more to get through on this questions form for the podcast, and then I have a lifetime's worth on Instagram that I can pull up if I need to. But honestly, it would help me a lot if you would submit them through this Google form, just because it's easier for me to look at while I'm recording. And if I have to pull up Instagram and go back to my story archives and all that kind of stuff, it's just harder on me. It takes more energy. So I'll be able to make these more if I have more energy and more time. So yeah, you'll help me out a lot by doing that. I like to keep things in one place. But yeah, I thank you guys for joining me today. I hope you like this style of podcast, and let me know if you do. Thank you so much to everybody who's been leaving me 5-star podcast reviews lately. You guys are so sweet. And because of you, the podcast is reaching a lot more people. And I really, really appreciate that. We're getting close to hopefully being able to hire a producer so that we can, improve the content quality, the polishing of it, editing. These are things that I really want to get to. But Thank you. This is definitely a grassroots approach. One thing I did want to mention is that I have a new way for people to support the podcast if you feel so called. There is a little tab through my podcast host Buzzsprout where you can do like a monthly donation of like as low as like $5 a month or something like that. So if you get a lot out of this podcast and it's brought value to your life, consider doing that, even just like, one month and then canceling it or what have you, buy me a coffee or whatever. It helps me a lot to be able to like afford better equipment and to help me take away other pieces of my work and my life so that I can focus more on the podcast. And I know there are many of you who are dedicated listeners and, you've messaged me and told me that you've gotten a lot out of this, which is always wonderful for me to hear because like I've said before, I feel like I'm just talking to myself. So I'm glad you're here. If you have the means to do something like that, definitely, I would really, really be appreciative. And I will say your name out loud to everybody. I will let them know who you are, so that we can all publicly thank you. But that's all I have for you guys today. So I'll see you next time. Have a great week.